Maroon Nation 954 back in the building, coming at you live for the second week in the last fiscal quarter of 2019. 400 years, 1619 to 2019. We're going to stay steady like Freddie. You show up, you put the work in, and then you have fun on the mic. Sit back, ride out with me. We're going to get into it. Tonight's Dr. Carter G. Woodson quote. It was well understood that if by the teaching of history, the European man could be further assured of his superiority, and the Negro could be made to feel that he had always been a failure, and that the subjection of his will to some other race is necessary, the freedman then would still be a slave. If you can control a man's thinking, you don't have to worry about his actions. When you determine what a man shall think, you don't have to concern yourself about what he will do. Dr. Carter G. Woodson. Tonight's Black Inventor. Mr. Newman R. Marshman invented the typewriting machine. Federal patent number 315366, April 7th, 1885. Let's get into the definitions. We're adding one additional definition tonight instead of the usual three. The first definition, American, noun, a native or citizen of the United States. The next definition, descendants, one who follows in the bloodline of an ancestor, either lineally or collaterally. The next definition, slavery, a situation in which one person has absolute power over the life, fortune, and liberty of another. Next definition, treaty, an agreement formally signed, ratified, or adhered to between two nations or sovereigns. Let's get into the 12 steps in the practical program of action for the American descendants of slavery. Step 1. Learn about the estate or estates your family originated from. Step 2. Who established that estate? Step 3. What nation and confederacy had jurisdiction over that area prior to the European? Step 4. Ask all nonprofit organizations you attend, what's your position on reparations? Step 5. They either support it or they don't. No support, no money. However, if they support it, then immediately children and adults need weekly classes free of charge about steps 1, 2, and 3, and field trips to ADOS landmarks in that city, county, and state. Step 6. Don't support European holidays for the remainder of the year. Step 7. Avoid spending money with any small business that doesn't hire your people. Step 8. All businesses need operating cash. Spend money with American black businesses. Step 9. All other groups rely on our energy and operating cash to survive. Set the trends of making other groups follow our lead and support our clubs, services, products, and entertainment. Step 10. The U.S. government is bankrupt. The Federal Reserve prints money, i.e. quantitative easing. It also burns money, i.e. quantitative tightening. The U.S. dollar hasn't been backed by gold since Richard Nixon in 1971. The government operates off the full faith of its citizens to pay debt and taxes. American descendants of slavery no longer have faith in the United States government. This is why financial support will be altered, stopped, and redirected. Step 11. Teach your kids 1 hour a day about their history on this land. Subsection A. Have them learn about a black inventor. Subsection B. Have them know about our heroes. Subsection C. They should know the European that conquered the estate you live in. Subsection D. They should know the nation of people prior to European invasion, militarily and culturally. Step 12. Practicing these steps will educate us on the land we're claiming, America, and attaches us to the U.S. history and laws of the United States government. Every estate American descendants of slavery live in should have steps 1, 2, and 3 advertised via social media, radio, and newspaper. This in 13 weeks, one fiscal quarter, will bring us together for our common cause. So here we are, week 2 in the last fiscal quarter. And again, a lot of noise is out there. It's a lot of drama via the media that's being shown to us. But the power of an idea written on paper becomes a goal. And then when you put a strategy behind that goal, you have a plan. The plan is the practical program of action. We're in week 2 of the last fiscal quarter of our 400th year milestone. Have you bought a book for your child to read in reference to their history on this land? Have you taken at least 1 hour in the last 2 weeks to teach your kid about an inventor and about your family bloodline and where your bloodline, what estate your bloodline comes from? Have you made a conscious decision to be prejudiced about who you spend your dollar with in the first 2 weeks of the last fiscal quarter? I have. I almost relapsed yesterday. I wanted to go to Subway, and the Subway closest to me, when I walked into the Subway, it was a bunch of, I don't want to say Middle Easterners, but people from Africa. We know who we're talking about, the ones that run all the gas stations and got all the Subways on lock. And when I walked in there, I saw the husband, I saw the wife, and I saw the kid. And I said, nah, I can't do it. I drove an extra 3 miles to a Subway where this guy, American black guy, has been working there probably for 10 years. I went in there, chopped it up with him a little bit. He's the manager now. He's got another young American black guy who fixed my sandwich. I was proud of myself. I almost relapsed. I almost did exactly what the steps said I shouldn't do. But I practiced the principle of honesty. Every dollar counts. What's your story? All right, so we getting into it tonight. The first thing we're going to do, we're going to do a little quick recap off the first Seminole War. And hopefully a lot of things jumped out that we were never taught in school about the awesome spirit and the freedom fighters from our lineage and the damage that was done to the United States government trying to enslave our group. So the first Seminole War, here's a quick recap. Chief Billy Bowlegs. Have you took the time to look up that American black hero? What about King Hatchie? Have you took the time to look up that American black hero? 1819, the United States government spent $5 million to acquire Florida from Spain. All right, remember that play. We also know they didn't beat us militarily. They slick acquired the land from Spain on a real estate deal. It wasn't like they beat us, right? They had to get jurisdiction legally over that area, so they didn't beat us to get the jurisdiction. They slick made a real estate deal purchase. Next point. The war took place without a declaration of war. So your intent was to hide it. Your intent was to hide it. You didn't want people to know not only the awesome mind that we have, which is why I mentioned black inventors, you also didn't want us to know about that warrior spirit that we have. But we see it via sports, whether it's boxing, football. We see it. We're just disconnected from we misapply it because we lack knowledge of our history. Andrew Jackson, General Gaines, James Oglethorpe, the Georgia militia, the Patriots, and the United States government are our historical enemies. I'm going to say that again. Andrew Jackson, General Gaines, James Oglethorpe, the Georgia militia, the Patriots, and the United States government are our historical enemies. Next point, 1823. The Treaty of Moultrie Creek was signed. Next point, Florida had over 35 Maroon settlements by the end of the First War. Next point, Europeans and Creek natives violated the Treaty of Moultrie Creek by raiding villages and taking men, women, and children of the Seminole Nation and selling them into slave markets. Last point. Of the 5 nations, only the Seminole Nation rejected chattel slavery. So that's a brief recap of the First Seminole War and a lot of the different plays that went down. So now we're getting ready to go into the Second Seminole War. And we understand the first divide is taking place with the Treaty of Moultrie Creek. We've got the Seminole Nation that decided to not sell out, but they switched up on us. So they decided to go down to southern central Florida, which is the Everglades area, right? Once they got down there, they quickly found out that Europeans in the Creek Nation, they started kidnapping men, women, and kids, putting them into the slave market, right? So losing is a part of winning. They understood that was a bad deal. More importantly, we were not added into that treaty, meaning the Maroon Nation, the American descendants of slavery, those that escaped the plantations, built their own communities. We were excluded. So we don't want to leave that out. I want to drop these Maroon historical points before we get into this Second Seminole War. I actually have, should be, I got 10 of them for you. First point, Maroon historical points. Native blacks were experts in tropical agriculture and taught both the Native American and Europeans. So understand, the Maroons, those American descendants of slavery, we were experts in tropical agriculture. Not only did we school the Native Americans, which would have been that Seminole Nation in Florida, we also schooled the Europeans, those of us that were on the plantations in the meantime, in between time. Point 2. Maroon settlements took daring names. Here's 4 names of the communities that we had in Florida as American descendants of slavery. And as I say these names, you can't tell me. You gotta be from us to understand the names of these communities. The name of the first community, God Knows Me and None Else. The second community, Disturb Me If You Dare. The third community, Come Try Me If You Be Men. And last but not least, the fourth community, I shall molder before I shall be taken. Third point, Maroons made special efforts to preserve their ancestral ways and pass them on to their children. That's what I'm doing right now, people. And we all, with that Maroon spirit, have to get in the habit of this. We have to pass on our ancestral ways to the children. Point 4. Trade became a vital part of economic life. Maroons exchanged their farm produce for guns, ammo, gold, and jewelry. We had it going on. Point 5. Trade took place with slaves, masters, Native Americans, and Europeans. Now that sounds like a Florida mentality. If none of these other points sound like a Florida mentality, we bust licks with everybody. It didn't matter. Slave owner, slave, European. Point 6. Maroon settlements. Some of these colonies built dynasties on African models that lasted for generations and had royal courts, cabinets, princes, and princesses. So this wasn't a fly-by-night operation. I want you to wrap your mind around what we had going on, how we operated, how we governed ourselves. Point 7. By the 18th century, Maroons born in the Americas were skilled in European battle and negotiating. So by the time the first Seminole War popped off, we were skilled in European battle and negotiating. Point 8. Maroons preferred to be known as governor or commander rather than king or queen. So you see how we got down? You was either a commander, which is a military term, or you was a governor. You operating and managing the commerce. We didn't care for the king or queen title. Step 9. Point 9. Maroons would use pebbles, coat buttons, and pieces of silver coins when they had no bullets. The mastermind. The making things happen when it's not a way to make things happen. We make it happen. Point 10, last point. European soldiers and officers rarely relished marching into the wilderness to face seasoned guerrilla warfare fighters. So amidst all the lies that we've been told, which we know they're lies because we've competed with Europeans on all different platforms, whether it's sports, academic, we've competed with them. We know they're not better than us. But this is just icing on the cake. European soldiers and officers rarely relish marching into the wilderness to face seasoned guerrilla warfare fighters. They knew what it was. All right, so let's get into the Second Seminole War. We've given a little backdrop about the recap. We've went into the Maroon points, the historical points. So let's get into the Second Seminole War. The root cause was the United States government use of tricks and force to have Seminole chiefs sign treaties agreeing to leave Florida for reservation land in Arkansas and Oklahoma. So they knew they couldn't beat us, right? They already bought the land from Spain. So now what the European is doing is they're playing a word game with the Seminole chiefs in these treaties. The language that they're using, this is what pops off the Second Seminole War, right? The interpretation of the Europeans' treaty, the Seminole Nation is taking it one way, where the European is taking it another. Meanwhile, you got the Maroon Nation off in the cut saying, I told you not to do business with them. But, so here we go. We're going into the Second Seminole War, and it's based off these contracts, these treaties. The Seminole Nation felt like they were getting finessed. Well, we know they were getting finessed because after the Treaty of Moultrie Creek, they started kidnapping men, women, and children, putting them into the slave market. Black Seminoles and Maroons knew any agreement with the United States government would mean bondage. So now the Seminole Nation is starting to come around and understand what the Maroons were saying from the jump, right? Now they realizing any agreement is going to put us in bondage, right? So once again, the enemy of my enemy is your enemy. So at the end of the day, we're not going to stay mad at each other, but we told you that off the rip. You had to learn the hard way though. 1835, King Philip led Seminoles on raids of United States government plantations. That's another hero that you want to write down. King Philip. All right, so we had King Hatchie in the first Seminole War. We had Chief Billy Bowlegs in the first Seminole War. Now we got King Philip in the second Seminole War. All right, and we're in the year 1835. So if we look back at our timeline, we understand that the Treaty of Moultrie Creek was signed in 1823. And then in 1826, King Philip protested. Okay. So 9 years later in 1835, that same king, King Philip, we bum rushed government plantations. Chief Osceola Maroon Black wife was seized. All right, so this is another hero. Chief Osceola comes into the picture now in the second Seminole War. But he comes in because he has a maroon wife. All right, so she escaped slavery. She escaped the legal construct of slavery that the European had constructed. And so now they've kidnapped his wife. Chief Osceola murdered a government agent. All right, so we already see it's an eye for an eye. You snatch my wife, I kill one of your employees. 1835, war erupted again between the United States government and Seminole/Maroons. So we see how this whole thing popped off. It all goes back to the treaties, to the agreements. From the agreements, King Philip had to do what he had to do. You snatching my men, women, and children, putting them into slavery. So he starts bum rushing government plantations. At the same time that he's attacking government plantations, the European sends an agent down to kidnap another chief's wife, which was Chief Osceola. So Chief Osceola realizes his wife gets seized. He turns around and kills a government agent. At that point, it's zero understanding. So we back going at it. The United States Major Francis Dade entire force was massacred. All right, so the second war is popped off. We got a government agent dead. We got a chief's wife seized. We got a King Philip with his warlords. He's bum rushing United States government plantations. And so the United States government sends Major Francis Dade, and his entire force was massacred. Now, this is for all my South Florida natives, everybody who grew up in South Florida, right? More particularly Dade County. This is our problem right here. Major Francis Dade. How many of us have ran around repping the county that we lived in growing up in South Florida, Dade County, 305, never knowing that the county was named after a after a United States military officer who our people massacred to prevent from being enslaved. Yet 200 years later, American descendants of slavery, American native blacks, we run around to this day claiming Dade County, not knowing we're claiming our enemy's name. That's a nigga. So when the European calls us niggas, that's what they mean. You don't know your history on this land. You're repping Dade County, not knowing that Major Dade Francis was attempting to kill or capture our ancestors. Not only did we kill him, we killed his entire squad. But you miseducate us and you misschool us, and now you got cats to this day will fight you about Dade County, not knowing the history of how that county got its name. That's our problem. We've been disconnected from the land. Miami, Florida's county was named after him. So how many Europeans you think living in South Florida right now, they know that historical fact, how Dade County got its name? Meanwhile, niggas running around and don't even know it, and we rep that name harder than anybody. That's a problem. 1836. General Sidney Thompson, 1836, General Sidney Thomas Jessup. He had a quote a year into this war. His quote states the following: "This, you may be assured, is a Maroon and not a Seminole War." So we can clearly see that the tide is changing in the Second Seminole War, because now you have European United States military officers starting to recognize who's organizing these operations, who's organizing these attacks. It's not the Seminole Nation, it's really these runaways over here. Seminole leaders: Abraham, John Horse, Chief Osceola, and Wildcat. I'm going to say those names again because, again, these are more Black American heroes. Let me say that properly. These are more American Black heroes that we all should be honoring. We all should be celebrating. They should all have a holiday within our community, within our heritage, within our history. Abraham, John Horse, Chief Osceola, and Wildcat. Riders. Take your time, do your homework on them as we continue into this. Maroons and Seminoles felt free to raid plantations, U.S. government, and slave masters. So at this point, it's just straight, it's mayhem. It's wide open. Not only are we trying the United States government and their military, we're trying the plantation owners, and we're raiding the slave masters. So that's what war looks like. Going into the Second Seminole War, 1 year in, we slaughter all of Major Francis's warlords. All of them get annihilated. We bum rushing plantations, we bum rushing the United States government, and we bum rushing slave owners. And generals are starting to take notes and recognize that the Seminoles are the ones that are leading these attacks. The Maroons are leading the attacks, not the Seminole Nation and their respected chiefs. And that makes sense when you think about it, because the Seminoles already, they got caught slipping with the Treaty of Moultrie Creek. So it makes sense that the Maroon Nation would say, all right, let us quarterback this thing. We know what we're dealing with because we've escaped from their reality, which was slavery. So let us show you how to play this game. Kill everything. So we're just getting into the Second Seminole War. And this is very, very important how this war is going to continue to play out and unfold. I'm going to get into the remainder. Well, not the remainder of it, but I'll get into more of the Seminole War next week, week 3 of the last fiscal quarter of 2019, the 400-year milestone. Repetition is the mother of learning. If you're taking time to learn about your lineage, if you come from the South, there's no reason why you shouldn't be listening to these videos and learning more about your history. But more importantly, stop by a Black bookstore. If you're on the South Side, you can stop at Greenboro Mall. You can go down the Mount Zion Road. the Nubian bookstore out there by South Lake Mall. If you're on the west side of Atlanta, you can go to the Black Madonna bookstore. Less than $20. Go pick up Miseducation of the Negro. Go pick up Dr. Claude Anderson's 101 Questions You Never Thought to Ask. Go pick up Afro-Americans and European Holidays of Mental Genocide. Do that for yourself and do it for your kids. All you got to do is 1 hour. Set your cell phone for 1 hour and take time to read about your history on this land. We don't need to know about Africa. Put your religious book down and actually deal with some historical facts about the land that your grandparents and your great-grandparents and their parents died on. It makes no sense to be 400 years in, myself included, to be this ignorant of our history. So here we are at a time where we have, all right, I'm going to talk to my generation real quick. Generation X, those of us that was in high school in the 90s, right? Would you have ever thought when you graduated high school or you dropped out of high school, whichever one in the 90s, don't matter. Would you have ever thought that 20 years later, gays would have more rights than you? Would you have thought 20 years later, back in the 90s, that immigrants would have more rights than you? You got a presidential election coming up in 2020, and here it is, our 400th year milestone, and no political candidate is giving us our due respect and recognition. Why do I say respect? 400 years, man. A lot of y'all been on your jobs 15, 20 years. Are you going to let somebody come in with less than 90 days on the job and get your days off and get your time off of work? So that's what's going on right now. We've been here 400 years and we've got immigrants that's been here since the 60s. We've got gays, which is a class of Europeans. Stay with me. Europeans just created another sexual class. It's a class. It's still Europeans. They're about to get reparations from the same government that enslaved us. But they act crazy when we talk about our reparations. And we've been here 400 years. These people have been federally recognized less than 6, 7 years. And they're already about to go to the Supreme Court for reparations. And we're not off the chain. We're not saying stop the madness. Something, I don't know what to say. It makes no sense. Europeans who created a legal construct of slavery and targeted people based on their skin are now trying to finesse the same group that they enslaved and trying to say, hey, if I'm European and I'm gay, I want reparations. Meanwhile, the people that were actually enslaved under the United States government law, and you only acted right due to the Seminole Wars and due to the Maroon Nation that got with your program. And then you realize, all right, I'll make some corrections to the Constitution. All right, we'll add the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. That was only after we went to busting that. And now here we are in 2019. And y'all trying to run it on us by giving your own people reparations. That's no different than in the 60s with the Civil Rights Movement, how they slid in. Now watch this. Let me back up and break it down. The word minority. American descendants of slavery are in that bowl. Immigrants are in that bowl. Handicaps are in that bowl. Gays are in that bowl. And European women are in that bowl. How did European women get in the bowl with us for our civil rights when they were married to the European men who were not only passing laws, but lynching us and slave patrolling us? How did they get into the minority bowl with us during the 60s? How did gays get in the bowl with us as a minority class during the 60s? How did immigrants get in the bowl with us during the 60s? How did handicaps get in the bowl with us during the 60s? So let's do the story of accounting. Any money and resources that's allocated to this make-believe group minority, the money got to get bust down 5 or 6 ways. Back in the day, we call that ant dicking. So now here we are again, fast forward 50 years later, almost 60 years later. Now they're trying the same trick that they did in the 60s with our ancestors. Now you've created a class called gay. And now you're going to slick try to bring them in under the Civil Rights Act that we fought for. Our ancestors got water holes, attacked by dogs, churches were getting bombed. Now you're slick trying to use our Civil Rights Act so you can get reparations. In the same year, that's our 400-year milestone. It's an intellectual slap in the face, and my people don't see it because we too busy riding around, listening to rap music. If I'm not talking about us, I'm talking to us. If you know your favorite rap song or your rap album word for word, if you took 1 hour a day, you could also learn your history on this land. Our biggest problem is we don't know our history. So we got all these other groups of people who don't have the time in on the land, reaping benefits from something that it must be strictly for us. And we're letting it slide. It's time to be unapologetic. I don't care if you're gay. Your gayness has nothing to do with you being a European first. And your gayness has nothing to do with it's 400 years in. If you ain't got 400 years in, get to the back of the line. What's so hard about that? You would do the same thing on your job. You're not going to let somebody that's on probation, you're not going to let a temp worker come in with less than 90 days, get your position, get more pay than you, and get your days off. So how are we letting these other groups come over here when we've been here 400 years? And we're letting the political discussion be wrapped around an illegal immigrant situation? We're letting politics be wrapped around, what are they calling it? I don't even know what they're calling it. But gays got this thing going on where they're trying to actually mute what you say. I thought Luke from 2 Live Crew addressed that 30 years ago with the freedom of speech. So now we got soft people trying to dictate based on how they feel what we should say. Meanwhile, you just deal with the fact that we're going to ignore all the things that we're supposed to be doing for your group. It's embarrassing. It's embarrassing. Again, you may not have any hope. You may not have any faith. You might not have any trust. You might not have any fruition in the fact that we can change this government. But don't pass that sickness on to your kids. Admit to yourself that you're sick, but give that child a chance to say, you don't have to be like me. That's our problem. Now they're trying to push gay study in school. I'm sorry, before we get to that, let's amp up the black history for the American descendants of slavery kids times 10 before we even address what y'all got going on. Because if I remember correctly, Back in the day when we used to read the Weekly Reader and we was in middle school and high school, if I remember correctly, they talked about how that lifestyle gives you a very high percentage of catching HIV. It's very interesting. In a 20-year period, they never talk about the downside of that lifestyle anymore. Oh, they're just going to promote it like it's all good. But check out the HIV rate in Atlanta. And I'm a heterosexual man and been in a monogamous relationship for, don't get mad at me, 6-7 years. And guess what? It's to the point now. And I thought I'd never say this growing up in South Florida. It's to the point now where you really don't even want to date in Atlanta. You don't know what's going on. So it's just real interesting how society is getting sicker. At least there was enough morality back in the 90s and the late 80s to understand that, yeah, this lifestyle will kill you. And it's just amazing how they don't even bring that up anymore about this whole gay agenda. When all you got to do is look at the CDC when they give their report about Atlanta off the chain. I digress. Again, week 2 is in the books. Where did you spend your money? Buy a Black History book. Take 1 hour out the day and teach your kids. That nonprofit organization that you participate in and go to, bi-weekly, every week, once a month. It's time for you to show up to the business meeting. And it's time for somebody to ask the question, what's your stance for reparations? We're the only group that's not protected. We're the only group that's not protected under this government, but we have institutions and organizations that market. It sounds like they're for us, but it's time to put their feet to the fire. If you're not with us, then there's no more money. You have to find you something else to do. You have to sell boiled peanuts or something, but you won't be preaching. You won't be calling yourself a higher learning society, and you have nothing to contribute to your own lineages justice claim under this government. So with that being said, next week we'll go ahead and get into week 3. I'm gonna leave you with the Earl Nightingale quote from The Strangest Secret. The captain of a ship always knows his destination. If you ask him where he's going, he'll tell you. He does not lift that anchor up and set sail unless there is a destination set, meaning a goal established. So regardless what happens via media or via society, it's time for us to lock in, play defense, and no more shorts.